Want to learn more about the standard for business process modeling? If so, check out this lesson on BPMN. Hey, Doc Squad, Dr. White here with the Business Analysis Doctor. Today, I'm giving you a tutorial on BPMN, or Business Process Modeling Notation. But before we get started, if you want more business analysis training and tips, be sure to subscribe to the page and turn on the notification bell. With that said, let's get started. BPMN stands for Business Process Model and Notation. This modeling method is used across both business and IT domains and is increasingly becoming an industry standard. Now let's talk about what you'll learn. We'll talk about what BPMN is. We'll discuss the main components of BPMN. We'll look at some BPMN rules, best practices, and then we'll take a look at a BPMN model. So what is BPMN? BPMN is a process modeling notation created to standardize the graphical representation of business procedures, transactions, and business collaborations. BPMN is used to only specify business processes. It's used to define and understand business procedures, to facilitate the understanding amongst all stakeholders. It's also used to illustrate internal and collaborative processes. It's also used to clarify internal and external participant roles, as well as facilitate workflow automation. There's 4 main element groups in BPMN. This includes flow objects, connecting objects, artifacts, and participants. Flow objects include events, activities, and gateways. The first type of flow object we'll look at is events. An event is something that happens during a process. They affect the flow of the process and usually have some trigger or impact. There are 3 main types of events. Start events indicate where a particular process begins. This event will not have any incoming sequence flows. Start events are presented as circles and must be drawn with a single thin line. Next, we have our intermediate events. An intermediate indicates where something happens between the start and the end of a process. It usually affects the flow of the process, but will not start or directly end the process. Intermediate events are presented as circles and must be drawn with a double thin line. An end event indicates where a particular process ends. This event will not have any outgoing sequence flows as it terminates the process. End events are presented as circles and must be drawn with a single thick line. There are several markers that can be used to represent the different dimension types of events, but these are the most common. A message event indicates that a message is sent to or from a participant. A timed event indicates that a specific time, date, or specific cycle can trigger an event. The error event indicates that some type of exception is interrupting or ending the process. It's represented with a lightning bolt symbol. The cancel event is used when a transactional sub-process is terminated without being completed. This dimension is represented with an X and cannot be used for a start event. The terminate event indicates that all activities in the process should be immediately ended. This event is represented by a circle with a thick black line and a dot in the middle. This type of dimension can only be used for end events. Now let's look at activities. Activities represent the work that a company performs within a process. They are presented as rectangles with rounded corners. There are 2 main types of activities. A task is an atomic activity within a process flow. It involves work that cannot be broken down to a finer level of detail. A sub-process is an activity whose work can be broken down to include more details such as subsections, phases, or layers. The internal details of a sub-process can be modeled using activities, gateways, events, and sequence flows. The sub-process is an object within a process, but it can also be opened up or exploded to show a lower level process. Like the task object, the sub-process is illustrated as a rectangle with rounded corners, but it also includes a small box with a plus sign. When the plus sign is selected, it leads to the more detailed process. Activities should be labeled with the verb-noun format to indicate the action that is being taken, as well as the object that is involved. For example, submit order or send email. Now let's discuss gateways. A gateway is used to control the splitting and joining of sequence flows in a process. The general icon for a gateway is a diamond, but there are several internal markers that indicate a particular type of control over the flow. Here are the most common types of gateways. An exclusive or default gateway is used to create alternative paths within a process flow. This is a decision point for the process. For a given decision, only one of the paths can be taken. An exclusion is considered to be the default gateway because it's used most commonly. It can be represented as an empty diamond or a diamond with the X marker. Generally, each outgoing path needs to be labeled to describe the condition that must be met. The event-based gateway represents a branching point in the process where the alternate paths that follow the gateway are based on events that occur. So it's similar to the exclusion gateway, except the alternate paths are determined based on a particular event occurring instead of a particular condition. Here, the decision is usually made by an external participant in the process. There are variations to the event-based gateway icon, but generally, it will include a gateway diamond with a circle in the middle that contains a pentagon. An inclusion gateway, or decision, can be used to create alternate or parallel paths within a process. Unlike the exclusive gateway, the inclusion of one condition does not exclude the other, which means that any combinations of outgoing paths can be taken. The inclusion gateway is represented as a decision diamond with a circle in the middle. The complex gateway can be used to model complex and combined behavior by using specific rules to enable a process to continue in ways that cannot be achieved with the other gateways. For example, if only 2 of the 4 decision conditions need to be met in order for the process to continue, then it can be specified in the complex gateway. A parallel gateway is used to combine paths to create parallel flows without checking any conditions. In a parallel fork, each outgoing flow is triggered only when one particular task is completed. A parallel join gateway will wait for the completion of all incoming flows to be completed before the outgoing flow is triggered. The parallel gateway must use the marker that's in the shape of a plus sign within a gateway diamond. Now let's shift our focus to connecting objects. This includes sequence flow, message flow, and associations. A sequence flow is used to show the order that activities will be performed in a process. A sequence flow is drawn as a single line with a solid arrowhead at the end. A message flow shows the flow of messages between 2 participants that are in separate pools. They are not used to connect objects within the same pool. Message flows are drawn with a single dashed line with an open circle at the start and an open arrowhead at the end. Associations link information and artifacts with the other BPMN objects. Associations are drawn with a single dotted line. Next up are our artifacts, which include data objects, groups, and annotations. Data objects represent items that store or convey information during a process. They can serve as inputs or outputs from an activity. They can represent a single object or collection of objects. Data objects are generally represented as a vertical rectangle with a folded top right corner, which represents a folded sheet of paper. A group is a boundary line around a cluster of objects that are within the same category. This grouping does not affect the sequence flow. A group is represented by a rounded rectangle outside of the grouped objects, creating a boundary with a solid dashed line. The category name appears on the diagram as the group label. Text annotations are used to provide additional information for the viewer of the BPMN diagram. A text annotation is an open rectangle drawn with a single solid line. It's generally connected to an object using an association line. And finally, we have our participants. Participants are business entities such as a company, company division, or customer, or a business role that performs a business process. Participants are placed within swim lanes and pools. A pool is a container separating participants from different entities that interact during the process. For example, when there is an interaction between internal employees and external business partners. If there are three separate organizations involved in a process, there will be three separate pools. Pools are only applicable in collaborative BPMN diagrams. They are drawn as a large rectangle that surrounds each group of participants that are within the same entity. A swim lane or lane is a container that separates activities from other activities performed by other roles, but are still within the same entity. Lanes are often used for participants with internal roles such as managers or associates. Also, systems or internal departments. Lanes are drawn with a rectangle that surrounds all activities performed by participants in a particular role. There can be multiple swim lanes within one pool. Each pool should be labeled according to the entity it represents, and each swim lane should be labeled with the actor's role to create a boundary around the activities they perform. Now let's look at some key BPMN rules. First, a start event must not have an incoming sequence flow. An end event must not have an outgoing sequence flow. Two end events in a process must not have the same name. If the activities meet at the same endpoint, then merge them. Two activities in a process must not have the same name. If the activity occurs multiple times, it should be demonstrated through the sequence flow lines. Flow objects outside of end events must have an outgoing flow. Activities must be labeled with a meaningful verb-noun phrase. A splitting gateway must have at least two outgoing flows. These flows need to be labeled to indicate the conditions that determine the flow. A joining gateway must have at least two input flows. Data flow objects must not connect to activities through sequence flow lines. These objects should be floating and connect to the activities with association lines. Message flows must be used for the interaction amongst different pools. All right, now let's look at some common best practices for BPMN diagramming. First, use start and end events to represent the process start and completion. Aim to fit the process model on one page. The primary scenario or happy path of the process should be very clear. Use gateways to depict splitting or merging sequence flows. Distinguish each exception to the process with gateway decisions. Use message flows consistently, especially with collaborative diagrams. Make the process logic clear by labeling the elements consistently. And finally, keep formatting simple and consistent. Now let's take a look at an example BPMN model using a loan underwriting process. In this example, we'll be looking at a collaborative diagram, which involves two separate organizations, a mortgage company and a broker firm. We can see that the mortgage company has two roles of loan setup rep and underwriter, each in its own lane. The broker firm only has one swim lane for the loan officer role. Now we can see that the process has a clear start and a clear end, both demonstrated with the message marker, which indicates that a notice both initiates and completes the process. As we can see, the first activity is where the setup rep reviews the loan submission. Then they're faced with the decision of whether or not the file is complete. If not, the setup rep adds preconditions and sends them to the loan officer to review the preconditions and resubmit the loan. Notice that message flow lines are used to illustrate the communication between the loan setup rep and the loan officer. This is because they're in different pools and you can't use sequence flow lines when the participants are not in the same pool. Now, if the file is complete, the setup rep submits the loan to underwriting, where the underwriter will underwrite the loan. As you can see, the underwrite loan activity is represented as a sub-process. This is because underwriting can be pretty involved and could have a number of different subsections, such as checking credit, reviewing the appraisal, reviewing financial statements and assets, and so on. Moving on, the underwriter will determine whether or not the underwriting can be completed. If no, the underwriter adds underwriting conditions and sends them to the loan officer to review and resubmit the loan. As you can see here, the add underwriting conditions creates an output or a data object. The data object is floating because it is not part of the sequence. If the data object is also an input to a task that follows, it can be connected by an association line, but you would not connect a data object to an activity with a sequence or message line. Now, if the underwriter is able to complete the underwrite, then the underwriter will make a final underwriting decision and the decision notice will get sent to the loan officer. And this is where the process ends. Notice in my annotation that the decision notice may either be an approval notice or denial notice. But because the determination didn't impact the flow of work, there was not a need for an additional decision here. Well, folks, that's what you need for a clear and effective process model with BPMN. If you learned something new, be sure to like and share the video. And also, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. And be sure to check out all the business analysis and BA certification training and resources we have for you at thebadoc.com. Now, thank you so much for watching. Have a productive and prosperous day, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.